I want to make sure that you caught the last lines of today's gospel. Jesus did this at the beginning of his signs at Cana in Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and his disciples began to believe in him. This is the fourth great celebration of Jesus' glory revealed. We have been celebrating a whole season of epiphanies, if you will. The first by the angels at the stable in Bethlehem, the second manifestation of the wise men, the third manifestation of Jesus that we heard last weekend, his baptism in the Jordan, and now this weekend with a manifestation of his glory at Cana in Galilee. That's why the church gives us this gospel kind of as a transition into ordinary time, still thinking about the many ways that God makes himself made manifest to us in our lives. But in this gospel, there's a big difference. The difference being that in the first three epiphanies that I mentioned, the Lord's glory is revealed by somebody else. Today we hear in the gospel that Jesus reveals his own glory to the people. The Word was made flesh and now dwells among us, says the prologue of John. The last sentence of the gospel of the book of John says that Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these were written that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through this belief you may have life in his name. This is the whole point of John's gospel. It is a call to faith. From the very beginning, we are called to faith. From the very beginning of humankind's relationship with God, God has been manifesting himself, revealing himself to us in many different ways. The early epiphanies, Moses' encounter with the burning bush, the column of fire that led the Israelites through the desert, the prophet's encounter with the small, still wind. All of these are ways that the people encountered the presence of God. And in our first reading from the prophet Isaiah this evening, we hear the prophet expressing a response to that manifestation. The people were very clearly a very special people, so special that the prophet calls them the espoused of Yahweh. He was dearer to them than any other nation. And this love is merely a shadow of what we would encounter in the person of Jesus. Our gospel today places us in the midst of a great celebration, the celebration of a wedding. Jesus joins in that celebration by sharing his life and his love with those present, not so much in the changing of water into wine, but making himself visible in the very ordinary circumstances of people's lives. And throughout the Gospels, that's where we see Jesus, not performing miracles to be high and mighty so that he would be noticed, but he encounters people where they are, in the very midst of the ordinariness of their lives. And in the ordinary moments of their lives, he transforms them in such a way that their lives would never be the same. This is the ministry of Jesus. In his gospel, John makes it a point to tell us how many ordinary things Jesus will take and make them extraordinary. The first of these signs, obviously, is today's gospel, the water made wine. But how else? In the 6th chapter, Jesus takes 5 ordinary loaves of bread, and he feeds 5,000, and he proclaims himself to be bread of life. He walks to the tomb of a friend, people who were in the midst of great grief, And he reaches out and says, I am resurrection and life, and raises his friend from the dead. What are the ways that Jesus is calling to transform your own life? I'm sure you can enumerate many. But the problem is, too many times we are like the steward in today's gospel. We know some things that happen, but we don't think about why the change was made. We stay blind to the very subtle ways that Jesus touches our lives. It may happen as simply in us as a change of attitude, a change of a small way of life. It's necessary that we see the work of God in the very ordinary events of our lives. Miracles are abounding, not the great things that we hear about, but the small miracles of our everyday lives. And St. Paul tells us today exactly how this transformation takes place. He says, each one of you is given a gift of the Spirit. You are given all the power of the Spirit, but not for yourself, but for others. We share in that same Spirit, and that Spirit manifests itself in diversified ways, constantly transforming our world from ordinary into the extraordinary, forging new relationships or deeper relationships with God. The Spirit is that energy in us that urges us onward to seek out the better, to seek out the good, to seek out the abundant life in Christ. Paul reminds us that we must allow that Spirit to work continuously within us and allow that transformation in our hearts. Just as Yahweh espoused Israel, Jesus too calls us his beloved. Often Israel strayed from that relationship. We do too. But the good news is God never abandoned Israel, nor will he abandon us. God will never give up on us. He will continue to shower his gifts upon us until we realize the goodness that he is for us. So as you prepare to now celebrate this Eucharist, I'd ask you to think about the gifts that you have been given. Think about the many ways that God has made himself manifest in you. What will be God's next greatest epiphany? It's entirely up to you.